everyone, and welcome back to Aesthetic Chat with Kiki. I am your host, Kiana Gamble, and this is another episode of Season 4. I'm so excited to welcome Lahna. She is located in Seattle. She is a DNP, and I'm so excited for her to share all of her honest and raw advice with all of you. So, enjoy. Welcome, Lahna, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. First, I just want you to tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I got into aesthetic nursing through a friend, actually. She was working front desk at the Larrabee Center, and I was working in the ER, and we were just friends, and she was like, hey, they're short an OR nurse there, and she's like, it's only 2 days a week. You want to pick up extra? And I was like, sure, let's do it. And so I kind of started working in the OR with them 2 days a week, and one of the fellows there, he was injecting at the time, and he just took me under his wing and let me practice on him, and it took off from then. It was right around COVID too. So it was 2019 when I had started, and then COVID happened. So when we shut down, and then when I got back, it was like 5 months later. I was like, I feel like I'm brand new again.
Nice. Okay. So we're going to jump right into, DNP school and all the nitty gritty of that. So tell everyone what school you attended. Did you attend full-time, part-time, and like how long was the program?
I did Wazoo. It was the Vancouver campus. And their program is a hybrid program, once a month usually, and you'd sit through a full day of lecture. But because it was during COVID, it was all online. But now I think they're back to their hybrid program. It was full-time. It was 3 years through summer. It's a good program, I'd say. Online, I think if it was hybrid, like it initially it was intended to be, I probably wouldn't have liked it as much.
Gotcha. I had actually applied and was considering going there, and the biggest kind of deterrent for me was actually the hybrid model. And so I was really curious. I didn't realize you were part of the cohort that was completely online. But I think that hybrid portion where you have that commitment, having to go to campus 100% changes the commitment overall. What would you say the commitment time-wise and the course load? Was it all fairly manageable? Were you working full-time, part-time? What did that all look like?
I don't think we began clinicals until halfway through the second year. So the first year and a half, I guess I was working almost full-time, except the 1 day a month where they would do the 12-hour lecture. So you'd be on Zoom for 12 hours. And that was the 1 day that I, didn't work. But most of the time, I was working full-time because the course load was manageable. The teachers would record, the weekly lectures, and you would just come home and listen to them. But as far as homework and things like that, it wasn't heavy at all. At least I didn't think so. I was able to manage that. Once clinicals started, I was doing 2 days a week clinicals, so I was working 3 days a week.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, WSU is where they will find your clinicals, correct? So you weren't having to go out and find your own placement?
Yeah, there was a couple of classmates that had a hard time getting placed, and they were doing their own calling, but most of the time the program was very adamant about us not reaching out to any clinics. I've heard other programs, it's not like that, and it's pretty hard to find placements.
Yeah, so far the other injectors I've talked to that are either currently in a program or are just finished a program, they talk about pediatric rotation being the hardest one to find for sure. What would you say your biggest challenge was within the last 3 years? Because you had just graduated pretty recently.
What's interesting? The hardest part for me being in school was actually being an injector because I don't have exposure to bedside nursing anymore. And I've been out of bedside nursing. 2020 was the last time I worked. I was an ER nurse before this. So it was a while. So I wasn't working bedside while being in school. And so we'd go to these lectures and everybody would be like, oh, well, at work I saw this, and they can relate to what their thought process was for that diagnosis. And I was so out of it. I was like, I don't remember the last time I saw an abdominal pain patient walk through the door. So I think that was the hardest part, is because everybody, it just was, the firing was going off in their brain, and mine was all about injecting. I was like, well, I think that was honestly the hardest part for me. I didn't have any stories from work to share with the classmates.
That was one of my next questions for you, was within your cohort or even within the neighboring cohorts, did you have anyone else that is a nurse injector or had any semi-similar experience to you?
No, there was one other girl, and she was I asked her about lasers. She's like, oh, we don't do many lasers. We just do that one laser for skin cancer, and that's about it.
Yeah, I feel like, at least in my own experience, it becomes really, really difficult. And all the papers and everything that I was having to write, I was definitely pulling from my old experience at the bedside and mainly just writing about that versus trying to write about any type of experience that I have in the clinic. It just didn't seem as applicable. And then on top of that, I feel like the faculty, I don't think they have a good understanding of what we do.
I agree. I got a lot of pushback on my project just because they were like, that's not really medicine and you need to write a guideline for medicine. And yeah, there was not a single professor that was very like, oh, this is very interesting. Let me learn more about it. It was just like, nope.
Like a hard stop. Yeah. I do want to talk about your project. I know we had chatted a little bit off camera actually about this because I was having some similar issues with my own faculty and my own project. But walk us through being able to do a DNP project actually related to aesthetics.
Our project was to create a policy or a guideline for the clinical site that we were at. And this only worked because of COVID. We started our DNP project the first semester of school, actually, just kind of being, opening our eyes to what we're supposed to be doing throughout the whole 3 years. And so that was the nice part. But because it was 2020 and it was hard to find placement sites, they allowed us to do it at our work. And I was like, well, I work in aesthetics, and so it's going to have to be an aesthetics project, right? So I wrote a guideline for vascular occlusions. The Larrabee Center has been open for 30 years. It's a very old practice. They had 2 injectors who have been injecting for like 20 years. So I walked in there kind of brand new. I didn't know much about, we know about vascular occlusions, but there was no protocols, no guidelines, nothing written. These older injectors are just like, yeah, this is what you do. Like, duh. And I was like, oh, I don't know this. So I set out to write at least one for myself. And I was like, well, at least I'll have one in my room. That way I can refer back to it. And so then once I put this idea together, I got pushback because in the second semester, they had us do a lit review, and you have to submit that there's enough literature to write your project. And 2020 is not that long ago. That's 4 years ago, right? There was still not a lot of research. I had pulled, I think, like 7 articles, and everybody else was doing like 20, 30. That was the hard part. And then going through, and they're like, well, how are you going to implement it? And then how are you going to evaluate it? But I figured out a way to check the boxes that they needed checked, and I was able to do it.
Very impressive. So for those listening and looking into this program, it sounds like it probably is not realistic for them to do their project in the same manner that you did.
Yeah, I'm not sure anymore, solely because it's not COVID, and I think things were just free for all during COVID.
Right.
And they would always say that too. They would be like, oh, well, this is just different. Like, this is not how it usually is. And, we're just getting you guys through. So I don't know how it is now.
Gotcha. With your project being surrounded vascular occlusions, had you had one previously?
I haven't, no, but a fellow colleague of mine did. The older injectors too, they still work at the Larrabee Center, talking to them after, Marilyn, she's been injecting for 40 years. She wrote the guidelines for college, and, so she's experienced a lot. So it was very interesting to get her perspective on vascular occlusions 40 years ago.
That's awesome, though. I'm sure she's a hub of knowledge. So my next question for you would be for the people that aren't over in the Seattle area, they don't understand kind of where you're working. Describe the practice that you're in, and then describe the need for your DNP.
So I work at a plastic surgery center. We have 2 floors. The first floor is all surgery, and the second floor is all aesthetics. So we're kind of split level. And the actual reason why I had applied to go to DNP school was because I was still in the ER at the time. I got in and I just started injecting, and then COVID hit. And so I was like, well, I have to go to school. It's like, what if this whole aesthetics thing is not going to work out because we're shut down and I can't work? But I was like, I know I can go to the hospital and work. I know I can make a living. So I went back and I was doing the program, and then aesthetics picked back up again, and I got really busy in my second year. And then I had those thoughts. I was thinking, why am I going back to school? Realistically, I was like, do I want to open up my own med spa? What do I want to do with realistically, some people do it simply so they can do their own good faith exams at the practice that they're in, or this goal of opening up their own practice. And so that's where I started having those thoughts. I was like, well, am I going to open up my practice? What am I doing with this degree? honestly, I had that thought moment. I was like, well, I guess I'll just finish and see what happens. And, and of course, talking with my friends and family, they're like, well, it's never going to hurt you to have a degree. I don't have kids. I don't have, it wasn't like I was splitting my time between family and this and that. I could do it. It was pretty easy. So I was like, I'm just going to finish and see where that takes me. I initially was like, oh yeah, I'll just open up my practice. And then I started talking to some practice owners. That changed. Speaking to practice owners changed my mind about opening a practice.
Yes, I think that there is definitely a conversation that you have to have with yourself with opening your own practice. It's like, do you want to be the entrepreneur? Do you want to be the intrapreneur? Like, what role do you want to play within a practice? And I think that that's very smart that you were talking to a bunch of people and getting a lot of perspectives, because I did the same thing. It can be very daunting, and it can easily be like, okay, if you're like not 100% in it, then I could easily see like being like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Right. And that's what I obviously talk to practice owners, but I also talk to some of the reps and what they see, because, you talk to practice owners and you get their perspective, but what about, the reps see another perspective too, right? And at a point where I'm at in my life, I don't think that I would open a practice right now, right? So again, I was thinking like, okay, well, if I get my degree and in 10 years from now, maybe I do want to take that route, then I can, and I don't have to go back to school. That was my thought process while I was in the program, having those second thoughts, like, what am I doing?
I feel like, so going into the program, you kind of had a different mindset, it sounds like. You're like, I'm going to use this in case the injecting thing doesn't really work out, and it's like my backup plan. Whereas, a lot of the injectors that are probably listening now, they might be newer injectors, but they're like, this is my career path, like this is what I'm going to be doing, and then applying to NP school. And I think that going through NP school, knowing that you're not going to use the degree, I think probably makes it not harder, but I think maybe the motivational aspect of it might be a little bit harder for people. Did you feel like once you had that realization that you're like, okay, might not need this, did it make it harder to put all of your effort into it?
Yes, actually it did. And not that it put effort in, I stopped caring. I stopped caring about my grades in a way. And not that I was doing awful. I've always been a 4.0 student. And I think halfway through this program, I was like, I don't need a 4.0 because this is my terminal degree. I'm not applying anywhere else. I don't need to submit transcripts anywhere. And then the thought of like, well, I don't really need to learn about the fourth line treatment for a UTI. So that's where it got kind of hard, was like, I was like, I'm not going to use this. I don't really care. I don't need to know every single, what month do you give what vaccine to the kid, right? So it got hard in that sense of, I just kind of stopped caring to learn the information because I wasn't going to use it.
Yeah. Do you ever see yourself going back to traditional medicine?
Honestly, no. My clinical rotations were at an urgent care center, which was fantastic, and I loved it. And my preceptor, I learned so much from him. It was incredible. But I don't think I could do that. I think if for some reason aesthetics falls and nobody's injecting and it just all goes away, then I don't think I would go back to traditional medicine.
I agree. I think it would be very hard. Did you feel like you got the same respect or understanding from your other classmates and your preceptors and staff going through the program and saying, hey, like, I'm an aesthetic nurse?
Definitely with my preceptors, there was a lot of almost looking down on me. Like if I wrote a case study incorrectly or if I picked something incorrectly, it was almost like, oh yeah, that's because you don't work in medicine right now. It was almost that kind of approach. But my clinical preceptor at the urgent care facility, he actually was really interested in it. He asked a lot of questions and he was all about it. But the faculty from the school was very like, nope, this is weird. And one of them even had the audacity to say, well, I think you should like not inject as much and maybe go work some bedside nursing again.
Oh, so frustrating. Did you apply to any other DNP schools?
No, I actually didn't. That was the only program that I applied to. I had looked at other schools. I had looked at UW and Seattle U because I did my undergrad at Seattle U, but Seattle U was so expensive. You lay out all the prices with the schools and you look at the curriculum, and in the end, it's the exact same degree. I'm like, why would I pay $30,000 more for that program? Right. And it was the same with UW. UW was a little bit more expensive. But I talked to my sister. She went to the UW DNP program. And of course, she was like, oh, it was not good. It was this, it was that. And it was she did hers all in person because this was 6 or 7 years ago. So I just ended up going to Wazoo because I was like, it's cheaper. It's going to be a hybrid online program.
I actually decided not to go to WSU. I had gotten in, but my cousin just graduated from there in 2020, and she was telling me all the issues with the program, and she was like faculty for the undergraduate program, and it was just a whole slew of, nightmares. And so I was like, I'm not going there.
I think every single program has bad eggs, honestly. I have a couple of clients who are DNP students at UW and other programs as well, and they all come and see me and tell me these stories about certain professors or certain lectures, and I'm like, so every program, I don't think if you have this expectation that you're going to go to DNP school and it's going to be just perfectly structured, no issues, you're setting yourself up for failure, because I think every program has, bad professors or bad clinical faculty.
Yeah, for sure. I think no program is perfect. And in talking to everyone, there's going to be an issue, whether it's faculty, whether it's, the way that they've structured their classes or whatever it is, there's going to be some type of hiccup. So I think that letting everyone know, like, yeah, expect it to be kind of a roller coaster. And honestly, I think they're all just trying to figure it out at the same time we are.
Yeah, because these faculty, they come and go too. It's not that there's, these faculty stay with the program for 15 years.
Absolutely. So if you graduated in May, have you sat for your boards yet?
Yeah, I actually sat for my boards prior to graduating. I ended up doing them in April. Yeah, because with our program allowed us to do it as long as you're done with your clinical hours and you had finished your DNP project. And I did the ANP exam.
Okay. Can you walk us through why you chose one certification exam over the other?
Yeah, well, to be just quite honest, I heard that it was easier.
I love that you also were able to sit for it before you graduated, so you could just be done. You know what I mean? Like, you graduate and you just don't have to worry about anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard it was easier for one, and I heard that it was more clinical based, whereas the other exam had more leadership and questions along that aspect, and I didn't study for those questions, so I was like, I'll just do clinical based. I feel like I could at least, with the questions, like, okay, this one's definitely not it, this one's definitely not it, so it must be this one, as far as clinical, right? So I ended up sitting for that exam for that reason. And I did not do a prep course. And so the way that I went about this was I was like, well, let me just wing it. And I was like, if I fail, then I'll go and I'll do a prep course and I'll still be along the same timeline as everybody else.
Traditionally, are you pretty good at taking exams?
Yeah, I'm a pretty test taker.
Okay. I love your honesty there that you said, you're like, well, we'll just kind of see how it goes. Did you do any studying prior to taking the exam?
No, I definitely did. I talked to another student. She had downloaded an app and it had a bunch of questions on it. So I downloaded that app and I just did those questions on repeat until I memorized them, without even looking. I was like, oh, I know the answer just for memorization. And that's all that I did. And that app was phenomenal.
Well, I'm impressed. That's actually amazing. And I love that you were like, well, we'll just kind of figure it out.
Always retake it, right?
Yes, for sure. Help those of us that are like you, that are 4.0 students, speaking for myself, that can't let go of that, wanting to do as best as they can versus just trying to, get through.
That's a hard one. It is very hard because it's just a mindset change. You just have to change that mindset. And I sat back and I thought, okay, when I graduated with my BSN, when I was applying for jobs or when I was writing up my resume, did I ever put that I had a 4.0, that I graduated summa cum laude? No, never, right? I was like, nobody asked, nobody cared. So why am I caring so much about this DNP program? I was like, for one, I'm not going to be applying to jobs because I'm going to stay with the Larrabee Center. And I was like, so I'm not going to be applying for jobs. And even in the future, when I am applying for jobs, nobody's going to be like, well, tell me about your GPA. I think that's really important. Nobody cares. Truly, nobody cares. They honestly don't even care what school you went to. They just care that you have a degree and that you have your licensure and that you're knowledgeable about what you're doing. So I had to just have that realization, no, it's going to be a little token for myself. Oh, I got a 4.0, which who cares? I guess it's a good feeling.
I think that that's a better way to approach it versus trying to have more of that perfectionistic tendency. At least with the DNP, looking back, honestly, I think if I had gone back now, I would probably just do my master's versus the DNP. And you can speak a little bit on this too, if that's how you're feeling as well. The DNP like classes themselves, I feel like it's write this paper, do this discussion post, respond to two peers with your sources. Like I still don't feel necessarily like I'm like, oh, I am getting the DNP. Like,
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Anybody who talks to me about going back to school, I discourage them from going to DNP school. I say just get your MSN. There is no point in getting a DNP. You're going to pay for an extra year of school and you're going to go through an extra year of stress and headaches. So there was some classes that I was like, okay, this is cool. But now that I've been out of it, I don't remember that class very much. So it was a lot of stuff. I'm like, well, I probably won't use this again. I guess it's cool.
100%. 100%. Any misconceptions about NP school that we haven't already covered that you wanted to share?
You know, people think that it is really, really hard, but I think it's just time management. I don't think it's extremely hard, especially if you've done bedside nursing for a while, because you can use just basic knowledge to get through the program. So I think if someone's really looking into going into school and the only thing that's deterring them is, oh, it's going to be really, really hard. I don't think I think BSN school was way harder than DNP school, honestly. I think it was way more time consuming and it was a lot of new knowledge that I was learning, a lot about nursing and medicines and things like this. And now that in DNP school you're familiar with things. Even though I haven't been in bedside nursing, I still know what Lasix is. So it's not a foreign concept anymore, and I think it was easier in that sense.
I completely agree. Honestly, it's more just finding the time or the motivation to sit down and do the stuff you don't want to do, especially after a long day in clinic, after you've seen patients. I'm like, the last thing I want to do is write this paper.
The biggest difference with BSN school was because it was an actual school. You're going to school. You're there every single day basically. You form tight bonds in RN school, and some of those girls I'm still friends with to this day, right? Whereas P school, it was so different because, especially if it's online, you do not form those friendships. It's hard because you can't bounce ideas off people because you don't have those friends. It takes a while to even, and it was still weird. I don't even know how I reached out to this one girl. I think we were introducing ourselves. She's like, "Oh, I live in Linwood, which is close to me." And then so I just like direct message her through the Zoom app. I said, "Hey, do you want to be my friend?" And I kind of told her this. I was like, it's really weird because I'm so used to with RN school, you have these big groups of friends, and you literally go together, you study together, you have ideas, you're constantly like texting with them, you're going out with them, you become best friends, and it's so different in P school.
Oh, 100%. I would say, yeah, being in a completely online program, especially when it's like structured just to be online and we don't have any like meetups, like you're pretty much on your own. It feels like you like recognize some of the same faces in your classes, but unless you reach out to them and you're like, oh, hey, be my friend, like you're not going to have nearly the same experience that you did, going through nursing school as an undergrad. Because I would say like some of those girls I'm still friends with as well because you are learning everything together and it's so involved.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it was helpful that with our program, because it was online, they needed to do assessments via Zoom. She lived in Linwood, and I was like, well, why don't we just do ours together? You can cast me, I'll cast you. And I was like, this is how we can be friends. I'll just come over to your house, you come over to my house.
I love it. I feel like we're on the same page in the fact that we're like, oh, it's really not that bad. But for someone who doesn't have that experience and maybe went straight into aesthetics, do you think that they would struggle more?
I think if they went straight to BSN school and then straight from BSN school to DNP school, you would still be so fresh in all that knowledge. It would be easy. But if you took a gap and you went straight into aesthetics and you were just injecting and you forgot all of bedside nursing, I think it would be harder, honestly, because you don't have any experience to recollect on. And there's so much information online. You could obviously Google everything, do all the research to write your case study, but there's still something to be said about like, oh, remember that one time I saw a patient with this is what we did, or this is what was suggested. And I do think it would be harder in that sense. You can't just jump back on ideas of what you did back in the day.
Lastly, I want you to share some of your professional 2024 goals.
My professional goals for 2024. Interestingly enough, I actually was talking to my friend about this, and she's an injector as well. My goal is to, because I was, starting injecting when I was in school, so my entire life was school and injecting, and I would attend every single one of those dinners you go to all the trainings, and my life was literally just me, myself, and I in school, and all my injecting and my injector friends, and so my goal actually was to kind of find a hobby that isn't injecting and find friends that aren't injectors, because I don't want my entire personality to be injecting. There's some injectors out there where it's great, that's what they want and they love that, but I want to have a little bit of separation from that. And I kind of started doing this at the end of 2023, is find a hobby, find friends that aren't injectors, and don't make your entire personality to be an injector, you know? And I think patients love that too, because then you can have real life conversations with them when they come sit in your chair and bond over something else that isn't injectables. So
I love that. I think that, yeah, separating your identity from what you do versus other things that you can enjoy. What is one of the hobbies that you've picked up since being done with school?
working out a lot more, which I worked out a lot through school too, but I had a lot of guilt. It was interesting. Every time I'd go to the gym during school, I'd feel guilt that I need to be doing this or I need to be doing that. I need to finish this. And so now it's very nice to go and go to the gym and work out for 2 hours and not have any guilt. And then I think taking that a step further is running macros and understanding the science behind that instead of just eating. So that's kind of where I've put my energy into. And and you do meet some friends at the gym. You meet some cool girls that you get to swap splits with, and yeah.
Nice. Is there any advice for those that are currently in NP school, looking into NP school?
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff we talked about, right, is if you don't have a clear goal on why you're going to school, then I would honestly say just pause and wait. Sit down, write out your goals, figure out what your true goal is with going back to school, then I'd say go. Otherwise, you might hit this roadblock that I did of like this, what am I doing? Is this the right thing for me, right? And you don't want to regret anything either. You don't want to regret, but just the time spent on it.
And then where can everyone find you on social media if they have questions for you?
Yeah, Injector Lahna. If you have questions, reach out to me. I'll do my best to answer.
All right, beauties. And that was a wrap on the episode. Thank you again, Lahna, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time, honesty, and yeah, if you have any questions for her, definitely reach out. But if you are looking for the podcast, it is at aesthetic.chat with Kiki on Instagram. You can find us on all streaming platforms, including YouTube. My Instagram is at aestheticnurse.kiki, and the website is aestheticnursekiki.com. All right, until next time, beauties. Bye.